Welcome to this video. Great to have you on board. In this video, I'll dive into React Native together with you. I'll explain what it is and we'll build a simple application with it where we can get our current location and share it with other users and see the position of other users on a map. So that's pretty cool, I think, and it will cover a lot of features React Native is all about. React Native, in case you weren't aware, is a library that builds up upon React and JavaScript and allows you to build native mobile apps, so apps for iOS and Android, that use React and JavaScript for you during the build process, during development, but then are real native apps that you distribute over the app stores that run natively on these devices. So let's have a look at how all of that works and how we can get started. Before we install anything and write any code, let's understand what React Native is. There's this one sentence you'll read from time to time when you come across React Native. It's learn once, write everywhere. That's kind of the theme of React Native. As I said at the intro of this video, React Native builds up upon React and JavaScript. Hence, we can use our JavaScript and React knowledge to build mobile apps, which of course sounds awesome. With React Native, we build apps that we still tailor for iOS or Android, but we don't have to write any Java or Swift code. And we learn the technology once to then write apps for iOS and Android. What React Native don't is, it's not an app which provides you with a component library of pre-styled components that look like material design on Android and iOS design on iOS. It instead gives you core building blocks which you can take, which you then have to style and compose on your own. But you will see this in this video. The idea behind React Native, of course, still is that we write real mobile apps, and I want to emphasize that, real native apps, not wrapped in some web view or anything like that, with JavaScript and React and the React Native library, which gives us a lot of utilities, helpers, and a couple of other things you will see in this video. So what is a React Native app, and maybe more importantly, what is it not? When you build an app with React Native, you're not building a web page running in the browser on your mobile device. That's not the case. You're not building a web page. You're also not building a web app that's hosted in a web view, like it would be the case for Ionic or Cordova apps. There you build a web app with CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, and then Cordova gives you a wrapper that will lead to a native app being created that is distributed over the app stores, but that wrapper just wraps your web page, so to say. So you got a native app, but don't really have native code under the hood. And that can lead to performance issues, or at least to worse performance than for native apps. The big advantage, of course, is that you got all the web stack technologies at your disposal, and you build your native app just as you build a web app. For React Native, it's different. There we have a real native app because all the UI is going to get compiled to native code. That's really important. We're going to get a native app out of that. The JavaScript part is going to stay JavaScript, but all of the UI elements, the buttons and so on, will be the native equivalents depending on which platform we're running on. That gives us better performance, but it also makes the development a bit harder because we're not really working with just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to be precise. We won't work with CSS at all, it's not supported. We won't work with traditional HTML elements at all, it's not in there. You will see what we got instead. And we can use JavaScript, but only the features that are supported by the environment React Native gives us. Now, I'll come back to all these things throughout the video though. So why don't we just get started and build our first React Native app? To get started with building React Native apps, I recommend the official docs, to which you can find a link in the video description. There's a getting started page, and for now we'll go with the quick start, though we'll soon go into a more elaborate project setup. But let's start with the quick start. Now, there you see one instruction, one installation command that might look familiar to you if you've worked with React. For React projects, so not React Native, just React, there is a package called Create React App, which makes it easy to get started with React projects and gives you a nice project with a nice build workflow out of the box. Now there's an equivalent for React Native. It's called create a React Native app, and we can just copy that command to install that tool on our machine. Now on Mac and Linux, you probably need to add sudo in front of it to get the right permissions. And then you're prompted to enter your password. And now this will install this package globally on your machine. Once this is done, you can create a new project by running create React Native app as a command. So here I navigated into the folder where I want to create my project, and then I'll name it share places. You can choose any name you want. This will create a new folder and install all the required dependencies. Here you can see it's using Yarn, an alternative to NPM, which I got installed. Check it out if you're facing any issues with NPM and that setup process. Also make sure to not use NPM version 5, at least at the point I'm recording this. It's buggy, use version 4 instead. And once all of that is finished, we actually can start our app already. We can navigate into the newly created folder and run npm start. Now this will build the project and spin up a development server, so that's pretty cool. You still get these web development-like features where your native app will actually connect to that development server to get live updates and so on. And now you can do something cool. You can visit the App Store on your real smartphone, the real device you own, and search for an app named Expo. Expo Client is the exact name. And if you got it, you can open it and scan that QR code you should see here. And this will connect your development server and launch your app on your real device. Though, and that's important, only in a wrapper. It doesn't really install it on your device, it just wraps your app. That's also why I won't use this approach here, because whilst it's nice to see something quickly on the phone, if you want to dig into native features of your app, so you want to use some native features like maps and so on, you can face difficulties with this wrapper, and if you ever want to publish your app and build it for the app stores, you need to leave this process here. So therefore, I will quit this process and run npm run eject, which is a command that gets out of that wrapped world here and gives us access to the full workflow, to the real native app and to the full capabilities of React Native, so to say. Though I will say this Expo approach is great and you can build apps with that too, but I like the original approach. So I'll run npm run eject. I'll choose a React Native project which I want to create. Give it a name as it should appear on the user device screens. Share places maybe. And then Android and Xcode Studio project name, because you can open that project in Android Studio and Xcode, which are the IDEs for developing native apps. And you will need to do this, especially for Xcode, if you add certain libraries that hook into real native device features. Now with that, we got this running. By the way, if you ever during npm start encounter an error, there should be also 2 commands you can copy in to fix that error immediately. So make sure to run these commands in that case. So with that, we got this working. Now it would be nice to see it in a code editor. So let's open the project in one. And here I opened it in Visual Studio Code. You could also use WebStorm, Atom, or Sublime, whatever you like. Now in there you'll see this Expo folder with some configuration. More importantly, Android and iOS, these folders hold the actual config files and builds of the native app, so don't delete them. In these files, you also find the projects you can open with Android Studio, open the full folder, or iOS, open the .xcode project file. We got Node modules, which holds all the dependencies of our JavaScript project, and then a couple of config files. And then there are 2 important files. Index.js kicks off our app by calling this strange app registry here in the end. And there it registers a function that returns our app component. And that app component can be found in the app.js file, and it's a normal React component. We import React, the normal React we also use in web projects. We create a component by extending React component. We have a render method. We export that component. And in the render method, we render some JSX, though, and that's important, you won't see a div, a span, a h1 tag, anything like that here. Because, and this is the most important takeaway you should take away from this video, React Native doesn't work with the normal HTML elements. It doesn't work with the normal DOM, it doesn't work with the normal CSS, it doesn't even work with the same JavaScript support as in the browser. All of that is given to you by React Native, and CSS isn't given to you at all. So instead of the normal DOM elements like a div, a span, h1 and so on, you use a couple of components provided by React Native, which we therefore import from the React Native package. Like the view, which essentially is your div replacement, and the text, which would be your paragraph or span replacement. And you can find a full list of all the components on the official docs. If you scroll down, you will find a components section with all the components that are built into React Native. And you will see that these aren't too many, because React Native is a lot about you building your own interfaces. It gives you some core building blocks, but you have to build your app on your own. And for a lot of features, like later when we add a map, we will also have to go to a third-party package to get that functionality, because React Native really only gives you the core to work with. So this is our code. Important maybe, that style sheet thing here at the bottom. Now I mentioned that CSS isn't part of React Native apps, it's not supported. This syntax here might look like CSS, but it's just JavaScript. And React Native gives you this style sheet object to create optimized JavaScript objects that basically allow you to define classes, like this property here, which then hold a couple of properties, which you then can assign to components. Now again, this is not CSS, it just emulates CSS, and it doesn't support all CSS features. For a list of the supported features, also check the video description, there is a cheat sheet to be found there. So this is our component, this is how it works. Now let's view it. And I want to view it on a simulator. Now you can also go back to the official docs, and on the Getting Started guide, if you click on Building Projects with Native Code, you can choose your operating system and for which operating system you want to build. And then you can find detailed instructions on how to set everything up there. Important, if you want to build for iOS on Windows, that unfortunately won't work. That's not permitted by Apple. Basically, you need Xcode to build an iOS app, and Xcode doesn't run on Windows. Other combinations like Android for Windows and so on are possible. So you will find installation instructions there, like for how do I install Android on Windows. Make sure to follow through all these steps here at the bottom. Install Android Studio, install the SDK. Maybe not the latest version, but the one before that. The latest version often isn't supported. Install the Android Device Manager, the build support library, and so on. Make sure to also set your environment variables as described here. So basically follow through the full process here. And once you did that, open Android Studio and create a new virtual device there. You can also find instructions on how to do that here. Preparing a virtual device. Here you find screenshots and so on. And in the end, you just launch it by clicking the play button. Once all of that is done, you can go into your project, open the terminal, that's the normal terminal, just integrated into my IDE, and run npm run Android. And the same, of course, for iOS once you set everything up there. This will open this terminal window where a process starts. That's your development server. Don't quit this. It's important to get live updates and for your app to continue running in development mode. This run Android process here will build your project now. Thereafter, it will finish and not keep running. So the development server is the only thing that keeps running. And this will now build the project and bundle it and ship it to the simulator and then also start it there. So once this is done, the app should start up on that simulator, which I started. Here it is, coming, needs to connect to the server. Now it's building on the server. And once that is done, once we reach 100% here, we should see our app run here on the left. And here it is. That's the text you see in app.js. Now let's quickly confirm this by adding our own text here where we say it works maybe. Like this. Let's save that. And now to get live updates, press Command M on Mac and Control M on Windows. And then click Enable Live Reload or even hot reloading if you want. You can also manually reload here or do that by pressing R twice, like this, and you should see your updated app here. Now that's really great. Of course, we don't just want to see some text here. We want to get the user location and also then share it with other users, display it on a map, and so on. Now to achieve that, we need to have a button. And I will create my own component for this. So I'll create a new folder which I name components.